The Battle of the Somme, a generation lost. July 1st, 1916, the opening day of the Battle of the Somme. By nightfall, nearly 60,000 British soldiers were dead, wounded, or missing. 60,000 in one day. To put that in perspective, the United States lost about 58,000 in the entire Vietnam War. And the ground gained? A few hundred yards, not miles, not cities. Just a sliver of mud. The Somme wasn't just another battle. It was the day an entire generation was thrown into the meat grinder. And for what? This is the truth of the Battle of the Somme. On War Unfiltered, please like and subscribe for new videos weekly. Thanks for joining us for today's remembrance. I hope you have a productive and peaceful week. Let's begin with today's story, and let's head to northern France. In 1916, World War I was locked in stalemate. The Western Front was a scar of trenches stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. France was bleeding at Verdun, fighting desperately against German assaults. Britain, still building its army of volunteers, faced pressure to relieve its ally. The result was a plan, a massive offensive along the River Somme. The idea was simple: hammer the German lines with artillery for a full week, destroy the barbed wire, collapse the bunkers, then send in infantry to stroll across no man's land and mop up what was left. On paper, a masterstroke, but in reality, this was a death sentence. The commander was Douglas Haig. He believed artillery would do the killing. For 7 days, over 1 million shells rained down. The noise was so loud you could hear it across the English Channel. But see, here was the problem. Many shells were duds, actual duds that never exploded, and most Germans were safe in deep dugouts, some 30 feet underground. And when the shelling stopped, they simply climbed back up to their machine guns. At 7:30 a.m. on July 1st, British whistles blew. Tens of thousands of men climbed out of the trenches, but they weren't told to run. They were ordered to march slowly, in formation, across open ground. Why? Because Haig and his generals thought the Germans were already wiped out. Instead, German machine guns opened fire, and the British walked straight into an industrial-scale slaughter. The Somme revealed just how outdated the generals' thinking really was. German machine guns cut down men by the thousands in minutes. Barbed wire stopped advancing troops cold. And artillery, the supposed wonder weapon, often misfired or exploded short. Gas had been used before, but at the Somme it was mostly ineffective. But there was one innovation: tanks. They made their first appearance in September 1916, huge lumbering beasts of steel. They terrified German troops at first, but they broke down constantly, got stuck in craters, and moved slower than a man could walk. Haig thought he was fighting the Napoleonic Wars with modern weapons. The truth was that modern weapons had already made his tactics obsolete. Let's look at the key figures in play at the Somme. Douglas Haig, Britain's top commander and nicknamed the Butcher of the Somme. He believed victory required sacrifice, and he was willing to spend men like ammunition. Ferdinand Foch, the French general desperate to relieve Verdun. For him, the Somme wasn't strategy, it was survival. Crown Prince Ruprecht of Bavaria, the German commander who perfected defense in depth. His goal wasn't to hold every inch, but to bleed the attackers dry. Then there's the soldiers. Britain's PALS battalions, as they were called, are noteworthy. These were men from the same towns, schools and factories who volunteered together. It meant loyalty in battle, but it also meant entire communities were wiped out in a single day. One of those battalions were known as the Accrington PALS, who went over the top with 720 men. By the end of the day, 584 of them were dead, wounded, or missing. In just half an hour, one town in England lost almost an entire generation of young men. For me, I don't think that type of devastation will ever truly sink in. The survivors would describe walking across fields covered in bodies. One soldier wrote that he tripped over the corpse of his best friend, still clutching his rifle. For many soldiers, the war ended before it truly began. They never got out of the first trench line, and the Germans bled just as badly. One officer called the Somme the muddy grave of the German field army. Germany lost thousands of its best men, not just ordinary soldiers, but the backbone of the army, junior officers and non-commissioned leaders. And that loss simply couldn't be replaced. By spring 1917, the Germans were forced to retreat to the Hindenburg Line, a shorter, stronger defensive wall. Why? Because they no longer had the manpower to hold their positions. The Somme also broke Britain's volunteers, but it also hollowed out Germany's professional corps. History books sometimes try to spin the Somme as a necessary sacrifice. Some even call it a success. Let's be honest though, it was a disaster. Haig clung to outdated tactics. Politicians wanted to do something to show progress, and when the bodies piled up, they doubled down instead of changing course. The Somme wasn't noble sacrifice, it was leadership gambling with human lives and losing. But since we are all cozy in the future, let's play the what-if game, shall we? But what if the British had launched the Somme differently? There's a realistic scenario historians argue about. If Haig had kept the offensive smaller, limited attacks with concentrated artillery, coordinated with creeping barrages, the British might have broken the German front in specific sectors. The Germans themselves admitted they were stretched to the limit by July 1916. A sharper, shorter offensive might have forced them to abandon key ground earlier, maybe even speeding up their 1917 retreat to the Hindenburg Line. Instead of 5 months of grinding slaughter, the Allies could have delivered a focused blow that bled Germany just as badly, without burning through an entire generation. The tragedy is, the opportunity was there, they just didn't take it. That obviously seems easy to say in retrospect, but our goal at War Unfiltered is to give you honest takes on history, and even the what could have beens, because history tends to repeat itself unless we learn from it. Think about this. The Somme was in 1916, 109 years ago. That's just 3 or 4 generations. If you're 30 today, your great-grandfather could have been there. Maybe your grandmother grew up listening to him tell stories about trenches and gas masks. Sometimes we get lost in the fast pace of today's world and act like this is ancient history. But it's not. It's close. Sometimes it feels too close. The Somme is the story of our great-grandparents' neighbors, brothers and friends, and that makes it uncomfortably real. The cultural impact is also another interesting topic. The Somme gave us war poetry, Wilfred Owen, Siegfried Sassoon. Not poems about glory, but about mud, gas, and futility. Here's what Siegfried Sassoon had to say in his poem called Attack. At dawn the ridge emerges massed and dun, in the wild purple of the glowing sun, smouldering through spouts of drifting smoke that shroud the menacing scarred slope, and one by one tanks creep and topple forward to the wire. The barrage roars and lifts, then clumsily bowed. With bombs and guns and shovels and battle gear, men jostle and climb to meet the bristling fire. Lines of grey, muttering faces masked with fear, they leave their trenches going over the top, while time ticks blank and busy on their wrists, and hope, with furtive eyes and grappling fists, flounders in mud. Oh Jesus, make it stop. Even as brief as this is, you can really feel his angst and sorrow in short form. Later films like Oh, What a Lovely War also mocked the propaganda from this battle. The Somme became shorthand for pointless slaughter, Let's talk more about the myths versus the realities after the war. Haig called it a success. The newspapers parroted his words: progress, courage, victory. But the reality? 1 million casualties for 6 miles. That wasn't victory. That was propaganda. And the Somme shows what happens when leaders ignore reality, when pride matters more than facts, when technology advances but generals don't. It's not just a lesson for 1916, it remains a warning for every leader today. To commemorate the fallen soldiers on both sides, this battlefield became a grave site. Over 150,000 British soldiers are buried on the Somme. Row after row of white stones stretch across northern France. At Thiepval, a memorial towers over the battlefield. It lists 72,000 men with no known grave, names carved in stone because their bodies vanished into the mud. Every year on July 1st, ceremonies are held there. They call it remembrance. But standing in front of 72,000 names doesn't feel like remembrance. It feels like proof that war can swallow generations whole and leave nothing but an inscription. To close this video out, the Somme lasted 5 extremely long months for the soldiers in the trenches and on the battlefield. 1 million men dead or wounded. 6 miles gained. At the end, nothing changed, except that Europe's youth was gone. The Somme isn't just history, it's a warning. And a century later, we still live in the shadow of a generation lost. This has been War Unfiltered. Thanks for watching. We upload new videos every week. Please subscribe and follow us on Patreon to suggest the next video topic.